The narrative of Mexico is poor and the US rich is extremely oversimplified. In fact, there was a long period in US history when American politicians themselves feared that their governmental institutions would crumble before their very eyes, along with the economic system that allowed white America to function. I am not talking about the present. I am talking about a period of roughly 30 years, with the Civil War right in the middle, when American elites declared the Mexicanization of American politics. The two economic systems that arose in the United States, the agrarian South, powered by slave labor, and the industrial North, powered mainly by free labor, were simply irreconcilable and would come to the brink of tearing the Republic apart. Thus, the United States went to war against itself. The American Civil War began in 1861 and ended in 1865. It was apparent that the United States was not immune to political instability and violence. Politicians asked themselves whether the American experiment had failed. These same politicians began drawing comparisons between the United States and Latin America. The republics south of the Rio Bravo were not politically stable. The territorially expansive countries that emerged from the Spanish Empire fractured rapidly as the 19th century progressed. As these cracks spread throughout much of Latin America, a primarily Spanish descended oligarchy dominated political and economic life. Political power in much of Latin America rested in the hands of whichever general commanded the largest army and was best positioned to march on the capital and depose whoever happened to sit in the rotating presidential chair at the time. Now, we are ready to analyze our document. It is a newspaper article published on August 6, 1867 by the Baltimore Sun, a relatively liberal publication. It begins by stating the express purpose of the United States in Latin America to spread democracy to these not yet civilized countries. The issue is that the exact opposite seems to have happened. According to the author, American politics were becoming much more similar to Mexican politics. Mexico went through one of its many civil wars between 1857 and 1861 and was immediately invaded by France afterwards. One of the generals who fought on the winning side of the Civil War and continued to resist the French was Mariano Escobedo. The author of the document cites a speech by Escobedo in which he expressed his pleasure in executing his enemies, members of the opposing faction that had sided with France during the invasion and had waged the Civil War beforehand. The author draws a direct parallel between this Mexican Civil War and the one the United States had just experienced. In the author's view, revenge is unnecessary and cruel, and he calls out American politicians who sought to make the South suffer after the Civil War. The author then mentions the situation in Tennessee, where Governor Parson Brownlow was trying to suppress a soft insurgency waged by the Ku Klux Klan. After the Civil War, as the northern states attempted to reassert their authority over the South, frequent outbreaks of violence occurred between paramilitary groups such as the KKK and federally backed militias. Perhaps this is the most prominent piece of evidence the author provides to support the idea of Mexicanization. The author concludes the article by expressing his belief that the United States would ultimately triumph over the forces dividing it and would eventually be able to exert its influence over the rest of Latin America. He concludes that through the influence of the superior American civilization, Mexico would become a better society.